Russia is under drone attack, refineries burn, and another power plant in Belgorod was hit. Kyiv's forces are widening blackouts as their frontline offensive continues. 3 villages have been liberated. The Russian army cannot stop the Ukrainian armed forces in the Zaporizhzhia direction. A brilliant attack by the security service of Ukraine behind enemy lines. Command headquarters, weapons depots, and locations of the occupiers have been hit. This is a shock. 160 Russian companies are buying components for the military-industrial complex in the West. Sanctions are not working. Scandal in Ukraine. Former Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhnyi accused Zelenskyy of derailing the counteroffensive in 2023. The president responded harshly. A sensational investigation. The CIA, together with Ukraine, planned the sabotage of Nord Stream. Fico and Orbán are declaring an energy war on Ukraine. Boxer Usyk does not rule out running in the presidential elections in Ukraine. War is inevitable. The US and Israel will begin military operations in Iran as early as this week. A shameful moment. EU countries are ready to boycott the Paralympics because of the participation of Russian athletes under their own flags. China is against Russia, and the Celestial Empire is beginning the liberation of its historically Chinese territories. My name is Katerina Nestorenko, and right now, here are the top stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you. Across the expanses of YouTube, another restless night in Russia. There is another blackout in Belgorod and the Belgorod region. At night, local residents reported explosions, and Russian media wrote that there were strikes on the thermal power plant. According to Governor Gladkov, the damage to the energy facility is significant.
Another attack, a massive attack on the energy facilities of the city of Belgorod. There is significant damage. We can see that there are partial losses of electricity and heat. So right now, we are figuring things out. And as always, our emergency crew has already gone out to begin restoration. As soon as we understand the causes and the timeline for restoration, we will try to provide updates carefully. Good evening to everyone. But
that's not all yet. It was also heated in the city of Velikie Luki in the Pskov region. Russian Telegram channels circulated footage of a large-scale fire. The local Velikolukskaya oil depot was hit by drones. The governor of the Pskov region confirmed the attack and officially acknowledged the ignition of a fuel and lubricant storage tank. Well, what can I say? I definitely like news like this. As they say, let it burn bright so it doesn't go out. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such sensible viewers. Write under this episode which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments, and now we continue. Next comes the most interesting part. The defense forces of Ukraine have pushed the enemy out of 3 settlements. This was reported by analysts from the Deep State portal.
The clearing of the gray zone by the defense forces continues. This could reach a certain scale. The plan is the same in other areas. And now you can see red zones on the map in the area of Ternov, Vishnev and Verbov. But an immediate question arises. When did the red zone disappear? And why does the gray zone remain? The enemy has been cleared out, preventing them from consolidating, reinforcing or building up there. However, there is still some presence, some leakage, and they continue to exert their pressure. That is why this is a zone of infiltration and constant pressure and assault actions from the enemy.
The situation remains difficult in the area of Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk.
If we talk about the latest updates, you can see for yourself that, essentially, the story with Mirnohrad is coming to an end. Now only the northwestern outskirts remain, where certain fighting is still ongoing. But the enemy is absorbing this city, gathering there. They are building up their positions there and have completely occupied it.
Meanwhile, the Perun warriors of the 42nd Mechanized Brigade are skillfully eliminating Russians in the Novopavlivka direction. The enemy has lost 1 passenger car with 2 Russians, 3 vans, another occupier's vehicle, and 3 antennas along with a warehouse containing provisions and ammunition. In addition, according to the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, our troops have launched a counterattack and an assault on one of the southern fronts. The main goal of the defense forces, says Voloshin, is to stop the enemy's advance toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a massive horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces, even if you can't do so financially. Write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they are watching us. Hungary is stopping the supply of diesel fuel to Ukraine.
We are stopping the export of diesel fuel to Ukraine, and supplies won't resume until they start pumping oil through the Druzhba pipeline again. This is the situation at the moment.
Furthermore, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico threatened to cut off electricity supplies to Ukraine if Kyiv does not unblock the transit of Russian oil through the pipeline. Friendship. And Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán stated that Ukraine is blackmailing him. Hungary?
Ukraine is blackmailing Hungary. She blocked the Druzhba oil pipeline. There we will have to use strategic reserves. This is the first issue on the agenda of today's government meeting.
I beg your pardon, gentlemen. Have you heard anything about the fact that the problems with oil pumping began after the Russian Federation struck the Druzhba pipeline?
There are alternative sources of oil supply for these countries. In particular, there is the Adria oil pipeline. It is fully ready for use and there are no technical reasons to remain dependent. There is no dependence on Russian oil for these countries, but we do not see any attempts to break free from dependence on Russian oil. On the contrary, despite the EU's policy, we see attempts to stay hooked on it for as long as possible. This is reminiscent of drug addiction. Yes.
Hungary and Slovakia do not want to get off the Russian oil needle, but it is Ukraine that is blackmailing everyone. Please make sure not to mix anything up. The United States could strike Iran as early as this Saturday, but the timing is preliminary since a final decision has not yet been made. CBS reports that Trump has not yet made a final decision on striking Iran. Discussions are ongoing, during which the White House is weighing the risks of escalation and both the political and military consequences. According to sources in the White House, the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford could arrive in the region as early as this weekend. In addition, there are US troops in the United Kingdom, including aircraft, tankers and fighters are moving closer to the Middle East. Meanwhile, China, Russia and Iran are preparing to conduct naval exercises in the Hormuz Strait.
The Joint Maneuvers Marine Security Belt 2026 will begin as early as tomorrow, according to Iranian agencies, Mir and Fars, citing Iranian Navy Admiral Hassan Maqsoodloo. The exercises will take place in the Hormuz Strait, a key route for global oil exports through which supplies from Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and the UAE pass.
Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reports that Iran is not preparing for a limited exchange of strikes, but for a scenario of prolonged and broader confrontation with the United States.
Iran is restoring and dispersing its ballistic missile launch infrastructure, making mobile launchers less vulnerable to airstrikes and returning to the concept of mosaic defense, a decentralized command system that will allow resistance to continue even in the event of strikes against the highest military and political leadership. And additionally, it is strengthening its nuclear facilities, including those in Isfahan and in the area of Mount Pickex, reinforcing them with air defense systems.
In addition, Israel has declared the highest level of readiness for war with Iran. In Jerusalem, they are expecting a possible US strike on Iran and are preparing to join the United States in the event of such a strike. What do you think? Will the US decide to strike Iran? Or will they still choose to use diplomacy? Russian and Belarusian athletes who fought against Ukraine have been allowed to participate in the Paralympics in Milan. They will compete under their own flags. Suspilna reports that among those admitted are Ivan Shiryaev, Vladislav Shinkar, Nikolai Bondarenko, Anton Bushmakin, Renat Vasilyev, Ruslan Ustyuzhin, Denis Ishbulatov, Rustam Saitin, and Rustam Sit. The Russian Paralympic Committee stated that about 500 participants in the war are already part of the national Paralympic teams. Ukraine's Minister of Youth and Sports, Matvei Ibini, announced that Ukrainian officials will not go to the Paralympics and will not be present there at the opening ceremony as a sign of protest. For his part, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, added that Ukraine will call on other countries to boycott the opening ceremony as well of the 2026 Paralympics due to the admission of Russia and Belarus. Sybiha emphasized the inadmissibility of raising the flags of aggressor countries while Russia's war against Ukraine is ongoing. For its part, the EU will boycott the opening of the Olympics, writes Politico. The European Union has decided to ignore the opening ceremony of the Paralympic Games as a protest against the reinstatement of Russian and Belarusian athletes. In particular, the event will not be attended by the European Commissioner for Sport, Glen Mikolev, who called on his colleagues to support this position of solidarity. What do you think about allowing Russian murderers to participate in the Paralympics? Ukraine's ambassador to Britain, Valerii Zaluzhnyi, told the Associated Press about the tension between him and Zelenskyy that arose when SBU officers burst into a temporary military command post in Kyiv with a search. According to Zaluzhnyi, this raid was a threat. In the presence of the agents, he called Yermak on the phone and warned, "I will repel this attack because I know how to fight." Then Zaluzhnyi called the head of the SBU, Vasil Malyuk. According to Zaluzhnyi, Malyuk said he knew nothing about the raid. Later, he learned that 2 days earlier, the SBU had applied to the Kyiv District Court for a search warrant for the same address. According to the court document, the service wanted to conduct a search at a strip club that was allegedly run by a criminal organization. However, as reported to the publication by 2 employees working in the new office, the strip club mentioned in the document had been closed even before the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. In a comment to Ukrainska Pravda, the security service of Ukraine confirmed that they had visited Zaluzhny's covert command post. However, they claimed that no searches actually took place and that Malyuk and Zaluzhnyi cleared up all misunderstandings and found common ground. Moreover, Zaluzhnyi stated that the 2023 counteroffensive plan was not properly implemented, since Zelenskyy and other officials did not allocate the necessary resources. According to him, the original idea was to concentrate the troops into a single force in order to liberate part of the Zaporizhzhia region, where the nuclear power plant is located, and then advance south to the Sea of Azov. Zaluzhnyi emphasized that significant concentration of forces and tactical surprise were required for success. According to him, the troops were spread out over a wide section of the front, which weakened their striking capabilities. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy also responded to Zaluzhny's high-profile statements.
It is important when our positions are strong, when all of us in Ukraine are working so that Ukraine can endure, defend itself, and achieve a just peace. Any other kind of politics in Ukraine right now is absolutely unnecessary. This is a time of war, a time to defend our country, to protect our people. Personal matters can wait.
What do you think of Zaluzhny's statements? Let us know. Nothing personal, just business, or as I understand it, Taiwan, South Korea, and Switzerland are selling components and equipment to Russian companies for the needs of Russia's military-industrial complex through a network of intermediaries. The insider has identified, just listen to this, 160 Russian companies that, in the 4th year of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, are freely purchasing Western components for their military-industrial complex. The largest share of critical supplies in 2024 has come specifically from Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and Switzerland. It is these countries that remain the key manufacturers of machine tool electronics that end up in Russia. And here is some information, as they say, to think about. The simultaneous imposition of all sanctions against the identified intermediaries. And here is some information, as they say, to think about. The simultaneous imposition of sanctions against all identified intermediaries who help Russia wage war could significantly complicate the production of Russian weapons. But honestly, I have to admit, I can't even imagine anymore what would have to happen for real, effective sanctions to be imposed against those who profit from this war. The CIA learned about the plans to blow up Nord Stream as early as the spring of 2022. This is discussed in an investigation by the German publication Der Spiegel. It is reported that in the spring of 2022, meetings were held in Kyiv between CIA representatives and Ukrainian specialists in sabotage operations. At that time, the Ukrainian side allegedly presented the idea of blowing up the gas pipelines through which the Russian Federation supplied gas to Germany. Sources from the publication claim that at the initial stage, the Americans received the plan positively. The details of the operation were discussed, including routes, vessels, and the training of divers to descend to depths of up to 80 meters. The operation was given the codename Diameter. According to Der Spiegel, the plan was approved by then-Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Zaluzhnyi. At the same time, according to sources, Zelenskyy was not aware of it. In the spring of 2022, according to the publication's sources, CIA representatives did not raise any objections and allegedly indicated that the operation was proceeding. However, in the summer, the U.S. position changed. The CIA refused to support the operation, including financially. According to the journalists, the reason was the risks of attacking the infrastructure of Germany's ally and the possible political consequences. In June 2022, the Dutch military intelligence service MIVD also learned about the plans for sabotage and warned the US and Germany. At that time, the German intelligence services were skeptical of the information since the indicated timing of the attack did not match. The operation was simply postponed later. Despite the US's attempts to stop the sabotage, it still took place. And according to Der Spiegel, the team found a new sponsor, a Ukrainian private businessman who financed about $300,000 in expenses. In September 2022, a rented yacht with a group of 6 people set out from the German town of Warnemünde into the Baltic Sea. Spiegel notes that journalists reached out to the CIA for comments, but they only stated that the investigation was extremely inaccurate, and it should not be considered factual information. Ukrainians will not support the surrender of territories because thousands of lives have been paid for them. This statement was made by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, in an interview with journalist Piers Morgan.
I'm not interested in all this pseudo-historical crap from Putin about why he started the war. I don't need to waste time on historical questions and reasons for why he started it. All this talk about Peter the Great and the rest is unnecessary for me. To end the war and move to diplomacy, this history is not needed.
In addition, Zelenskyy says that Russia is aiming for elections to remove him from office. But even in the case of a ceasefire, Ukrainian society is against holding elections during the war. Progress, failure, everything is stable, yet complicated. There are as many opinions about the trilateral negotiations between Ukraine, the US, and Russia as there are people and media outlets. But still, there is some clarity. Ukraine will not withdraw from Donbas, and Putin and the Russian Federation want to continue fighting. About the results of the latest trilateral meeting and the prospects for the next one, we will tell you more next.
The negotiations in Geneva on February 17th through 18th differ from the previous meeting in Abu Dhabi. The fact is, the parties work simultaneously in 2 directions, political and military. For this, the delegations split into groups.
Ukraine is working constructively. The ultimate goal remains unchanged, a just and lasting peace.
But according to The Economist, the Ukrainian delegation split not only for negotiations. Allegedly, there is no unified position within the team regarding the pace of a possible agreement.
One camp, led by former head of Ukrainian intelligence Kyrylo Budanov, believes it is better to quickly agree to the terms of US President Donald Trump and put an end to the military actions. At the same time, another group within the delegation, headed by Andriy Yermak, is not particularly interested in signing an agreement. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. According to journalists, he is trying to balance between these 2 approaches while at the same time having his own vision of the negotiation process.
We don't know what the journalists are basing this on, but it looks like a distortion. It is Russia that does not want to shift the focus from the main issue, peace. However, according to experts, what The Economist wrote about may actually be a deliberate tactic by the Ukrainian delegation.
The interpretation that something could divide us is clearly untrue. Because, well, it's obvious that the only condition for a quick deal would be for Ukraine to abandon the territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions that are not occupied by Russia, which, as everyone understands perfectly well, will not lead to peace. Russia has not changed any other conditions, yes, including the ceasefire, and this will only make the situation worse. And it's absolutely clear that Budanov understands this. There may be some disagreements over tactics, or perhaps there's another aspect. There's the good cop, bad cop tactic.
But let's get back to the negotiations themselves. Perhaps the most important update concerns the Europeans. Representatives of European countries did not participate in the trilateral negotiations. But as the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, said, there was a separate meeting with the Ukrainian and American delegations.
I concluded a separate meeting with representatives of the US and European partners, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. We discussed the results of today's round of negotiations and synchronized our approaches for the next steps.
Of course, Russia was against involving Europe, but the European delegation still arrived in Geneva.
Ukraine, represented by Zelenskyy, has repeatedly stated that Europe must take part in these negotiations. And this is absolutely logical, since Russia's war against Ukraine comes with open threats to Europe. This situation represents, in actual fact, a truly enormous and existential danger for all European countries. And quite naturally, the complex questions regarding the ending of this war as well as the specific terms on which it finally ends, are a matter of absolute and vital necessity for the people of Europe.
But let's return to the content of the negotiations. At the end of the first round of the Geneva meeting, Barak Ravid, a journalist from Axios, wrote that the political negotiations had reached a deadlock. And it was all because of Vladimir Medinsky. Yes, Putin once again sent this pseudo-historian to the negotiations. Interestingly, even Kremlin propagandists are trolling Medinsky's Rurik lecture.
What issues should be raised? Security, territory, duels, gifts. Were there at least any ugly stories, tell me?
Axios, citing Volodymyr Zelenskyy, wrote that Ukraine is concerned about Medinsky's participation in the negotiations, and this concern is not unfounded.
Medinsky likes to philosophize about the historical roots of the war. We don't have time for all that, so we need to make decisions and end the war.
Medinsky's participation is a direct sign that Russia is sabotaging the negotiations. This is also reported by the Washington Post.
The return of Vladimir Medinsky, an aide to President Vladimir Putin who previously questioned Ukraine's sovereignty, to head the Russian delegation at the negotiations in Geneva is a sign that Moscow intends to stick to its own positions. Harsh political demands on Ukraine aimed at removing Zelenskyy from power and undermining Ukrainian statehood.
The Kremlin, in turn, insists that Medinsky has always been the head of their delegation and that he was absent from the previous negotiations only because issues were being discussed in which
It was clear that the person was not competent and lacked the necessary skills or expertise required to successfully fulfill the requirements of the job. There, our group was led by Kostyukov. The group consisted of military personnel.
But no matter how the Kremlin tries to explain it, Medinsky is a very clear signal regarding Russia's peaceful intentions, or rather, the lack thereof.
Broadly speaking, the fact that the leadership in Moscow once again made the decision to appoint Medinsky as the head of the delegation was unmistakable evidence. A very strong signal that there wasn't even a genuine intention or sincere desire to engage in negotiations about anything at all. As for the situation...
As for the negotiations of the military group, according to Axios, there has been progress. According to the president of Ukraine, the discussion was about a mechanism for monitoring the ceasefire.
The military understands how to monitor a ceasefire and the end of the war if there is political will. They have almost reached an agreement on everything there. The monitoring will definitely involve the American side. And
a few more words about the first day of negotiations. In Russia, the meeting was described as tense. The negotiations lasted about 6 hours, all behind closed doors. Vladimir Zelenskyy also spoke about the difficult meeting.
Yesterday the meetings were indeed difficult, and we can state that Russia is trying to drag out the negotiations, which could already have reached the final stage.
In addition, as Axios reports citing Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine instructed the delegation to also raise the issue of a personal meeting with Putin. According to him, this is the best way to achieve a breakthrough on territorial issues within the negotiations.
Once again, Ukraine is demonstrating its readiness for real negotiations at the highest level directly. But there will be no meeting. Well, Putin, to put it mildly, he's not exactly brave. The Russians are doing everything they can to avoid this meeting. We saw how disgracefully he was just running away. Putin ran from the meeting in Turkey.
The issue of Russian strikes on Ukraine, of course, is also on the table.
the guys definitely need to raise the question about these strikes. The question, first and foremost, to the American side, which had suggested to both us and Russia to refrain from strikes. Ukraine is ready. We do not need war. And we always act in a mirrored way. We are defending our state.
On February 18th, the negotiations lasted only 2 hours. According to the head of the Russian delegation, Medinsky, everything is complicated.
You know, the negotiations went on for 2 days. Very long yesterday, in different formats. And then again today, for about 2 hours. They were difficult, but businesslike.
By the way, as expected, there is no progress on the issues of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the territory, but the next trilateral meeting is scheduled for the near future.
European intelligence agencies see no chance for peace in Ukraine in 2026, according to Reuters. According to the heads of intelligence services from several EU countries interviewed by the agency, the Russian Federation is not interested in a quick end to the war, and negotiations with the US are being used as a tool to weaken sanctions and secure favorable economic deals. One of Reuters' sources described the negotiation process itself as theater. Intelligence officers note that the Kremlin's strategic goals have not changed, weakening Ukraine, removing Zelenskyy, and turning the country into a neutral buffer. Even the possible transfer of Donbass, according to them, will not lead to peace. After that, Russia will put forward new demands. China is against the Russian Federation. Now, this is finally clear. The Celestial Empire is kicking Russia out of Central Asia and beginning a creeping reclamation of territories that are originally Chinese, which for now are still part of the Russian Federation. And on top of that, Xi Jinping is planning to meet with Trump in person. Here are the details.
The collapse of Putin's empire. Russia is ceasing to be a center of influence and power.
There is no need to be afraid. Whoever starts to panic will lose everything right away. But it's absolutely necessary to understand what might happen.
Still, that won't really change the situation because the invasion of Ukraine became not just a military but also a geopolitical suicide for the Kremlin. And it showed the whole world the weakness of Putin's empire. And while Putin is preoccupied with the war and saving his own power, China is taking over Russia's economic and political positions, from the Caucasus to the Caspian Sea. Simply put, Moscow is losing influence in places where it had been considered a leading player for decades.
China is trying to absorb the Russian Federation as much as possible. Of course, it's not doing this through any kind of military escalation or aggression. This is a soft takeover, a cultural takeover, a resource takeover, a technological takeover, a takeover in terms of shaping narratives, and integration into a unified financial system, because the Russian Federation now keeps its central bank reserves in yuan rather than as it used to. Previously, they were held in dollars and euros in freely convertible global reserve currencies.
Since the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has been steadily expanding its influence in Central Asia step by step. It is funding roads, railway hubs, pipelines, and more, turning the region into a new transit bridge between Asia and Europe, bypassing
of Russia. Once again, it is worth noting that the outcome does not rely exclusively on Beijing, although it involves them, and quite likely, it depends primarily on their specific actions and decisions. What kind of agency can we even talk about in this context?
Starting from September 15, 2025, Russians will have visa-free entry to China. And in Siberia and the Russian Far East, Chinese enclaves are already forming with their own schools, businesses, and culture. The Kremlin isn't developing the region, it's handing it over to foreigners for settlement.
The relationship between Russia and China has always been complicated, always ambiguous. And in their recent history, they resemble not so much the relations of friends, partners, or allies, but rather those of situational partners, and sometimes during periods of tension, even competitors. In some cases, these are regional, and in others, they're already partially global.
Currently, China accounts for a third of Russia's foreign trade. As of September 2025, there are at least 13,000 legal entities with Chinese capital operating in Russia. The total revenue of these companies last year exceeded $41 billion.
The relationship between Russia and China cannot be positive, because this area, the South Caucasus, Central Asia, has always been the zone of the CSTO BRICS, essentially the sphere of influence of the Russian Federation, which is absolutely unacceptable to China. And we can even see how the countries of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, for example, they are now closer to China in terms of both economy and security, rather than, for example, to the Russian Federation, which simply due to a lack of resources is no longer able to maintain the influence it once had in these regions.
Yet another blow to the Russian Federation from China. Chinese oil refiners have started refusing to purchase Russian oil, after the United States and other Western countries imposed sanctions against Russia's leading producers and some of their clients.
The relationship between the United States and China has become warmer, more constructive, although of course it remains tense, but they are finding common ground. They are finding common ground. Periods of mutual escalation, mostly economic of course, are replaced by periods of constructive dialogue, and the period of confrontation between the US and China is shifting into a kind of proxy.
Putin is slowly but surely losing power. Russia is losing its authority in the countries of the former USSR, which the Kremlin has always regarded as its satellites.
Sweden has approved a new military aid package for Ukraine worth 1.2 billion euros. The main focus is on strengthening air defense. About 400 million euros will be allocated for the purchase and transfer of Swedish-made Trident Mk2 anti-aircraft systems, which are effective against drones, as well as sensors and anti-aircraft guns. Another 524 million euros will go towards supporting Ukrainian production of long-range missiles and drones. More than 280 million euros are allocated for grenade launchers from the Swedish Army's reserves, artillery ammunition, spare parts, and training for Ukrainian soldiers. A grand deal that could secure a Nobel Prize for Trump and Putin. The Kremlin is trying to lure the American president with such bait. The amounts to be mastered are described as astronomical. More than $10 trillion are at stake in areas of cooperation, including energy and the division of the Arctic. It is Kirill Dmitriev, who oversees economic cooperation, who is supposed to present this tempting bait to Trump. Will Putin and his associates manage to hook and reel in the golden overseas catch? And what risks does this pose for Ukraine? Let's watch.
The Kremlin has offered the White House the greatest economic deal, which could potentially bring not only unimaginable wealth, but also the coveted Nobel Prize, reports The Economist. It seems that this is the answer to the question of why all this time Donald Trump refuses to stop the aggressor and is literally blackmailing the victim, forcing them to accept capitulation.
It would be better for Ukraine to sit down at the negotiating table as soon as possible. That's all I can say. We are in such a position that we want them to come.
The cunning KGB man quickly figured out the main weakness of the ex-businessman. And he already flew to Alaska with a $12 trillion offer. That's 6 annual budgets of some oiler. The Russians offered the Americans the opportunity to extract oil and gas in the Arctic, the development of rare earth metals, the creation of a data processing center with nuclear energy savings, and the construction of a tunnel under the Bering Strait. According to journalists, Putin even promised to return $5 billion worth of assets confiscated from the oil company ExxonMobil.
To take Putin at his word, I really don't know just how naive a person would actually have to be. Putin, responsibility. And Putin, and his many promises, these are all completely and utterly irrelevant things in his world today.
The entire negotiation track is overseen by Kirill Dmitriev. Since April of last year, he has met about a dozen times with Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff. Dmitriev not only flew across the ocean himself, but also shuttled Steve around, and later, both Steve and Trump's son-in-law. He hosted Jared in the Whitestone City, treated him to chebureks, and showed him Red Square. And following the old Golden Horde tradition, he sent care packages across the ocean.
Witkoff delivered a box of red caviar from the Khabarovsk region to Trump. This was reported by the Regional Ministry of Industry and Trade. Witkoff first tried the red caviar during a lunch at a Moscow restaurant. It made such a strong impression on him that the special envoy was presented with an entire box of caviar. Oh,
you can see just how close Russians and Americans have become over the past year from this video, Putin's microphone number 1. Propagandist Zarubin made an exclusive report from the latest meeting between Witkoff, Fakushner, and Putin. Here's how the Americans behaved while waiting for the dictator.
Before the meeting with Putin, people here are talking without an interpreter. On Trump's son-in-law's wrist, a red thread. Some people believe that such bracelets help with health and bring good luck. But he also has a ring on his finger. Josh Grunbaum has the same ring. And these are clearly smart rings, meaning they measure stress levels, heart rate, and sleep phases. At that moment, they clearly weren't under any particular stress. Smiles, pats on the shoulder, and even jokes.
Even Putin's interpreter received compliments from the Americans.
Steve Witkoff suddenly says,
all these trips and sweet smiles are for the sake of a big deal. According to The Economist, all last summer a huge number of lawyers across the ocean worked overtime to analyze possible scenarios for lifting sanctions on Russia. And after 2022, we're talking about 23,000 financial restrictions. American businesses hope to capture the Russian market, where Europeans were the leaders before the invasion, and they are also eager to gain access to the frozen assets. But the main thing that excites Trump's envoys is the potential stakes in mega projects capable of changing global commodity markets.
Most Russian oil fields are old and significantly depleted. To maintain production, the country needs large-scale infusions of foreign technology, labor, and capital. This could contribute to a shale revolution in Western Siberia, where, according to Artem Abramov from the consulting company Restati Energy, there may be about 12 billion barrels of recoverable oil and gas reserves. This is roughly equivalent to 7 years of oil production in the Permian Basin, the main shale region of the United States.
Putin is betting on the greed of his overseas counterpart, and so far, it's working. Businessmen who have temporarily found themselves in top positions. Superpowers are losing their heads over imaginary riches.
This is real trash. Footage has appeared online showing a taxi driver in Warsaw attacking a pregnant Ukrainian woman, spraying her with tear gas, blocking her exit, and insulting her and her husband. The incident took place in one of the districts of the Polish capital. The video of the attack was published by the Center for Monitoring Russian and Xenophobic Manifestations. Yes.
Film his face! Film his... Come here. Come here!
The media report that Anastasia, the Ukrainian woman, has been living in Poland for 10 years already. She is currently 5 months pregnant. That day, the couple parked their car near their home. When the man tried to leave, his way was blocked by a taxi that, despite a no-entry sign, drove onto the narrow street and stopped. According to the victims, the taxi driver, upon seeing a car with Ukrainian license plates, began shouting insults through the open window. In particular, he told them to go back to Ukraine. When Anastasia tried to calmly explain that the taxi was blocking the way, the driver called her a whore and used pepper spray against the couple. The pregnant woman began to suffocate.
Come here. Come here. This will be Emergady. It's okay, just come here, take your time. Come on, I'm sorry about that. Please, come here when you're ready. It's all going to be fine. My wife. I'm not getting involved, I'm just a fool there. Call the police.
The police have opened a case under the article on crimes based on national hatred. The attacker faces up to 3 years in prison. A brilliant attack by the SBU behind enemy lines. Command headquarters, weapons depots, and locations of the occupiers have been hit. The enemy cannot recover. Details of the masterful operation coming up next. A brilliant SBU operation that cut the occupiers off from their command. Secret facilities were hit, which are usually not so easy to reach.
In general, these places are very well hidden, securely concealed, and the issue of striking them is always very relevant.
We're talking about headquarters and command control points. Information about their locations is highly classified. And that's not surprising because the front depends on their work, but one careless action and the headquarters becomes exposed, and after that it's just a matter of technique.
As a rule, they are detected either by some kind of equipment, like, I don't know, a satellite flies over and spots something suspicious, or through interception, or from some careless conversation, like when a Russian soldier calls his mom and says, "Mom, you can't imagine, they let me work at a secret headquarters somewhere in the Zaporizhzhia region." It's not hard to intercept the conversation and identify the place, the location where he's speaking from.
Thanks to the Alpha Special Forces, 4 headquarters and command posts were blown up at once, and all of them were located behind enemy lines, that is, where the Russians felt securely hidden.
It's important for the commanders from different directions to gather there with their large maps. And of course, it's even better if generals show up with those huge stripes on their pants like highways. So they went in there, and of course that's when you hit them.
We won't go into the details of these operations. It's enough to understand that this is very painstaking work. But the damage inflicted on the occupiers was worth it. Thanks to the destruction of such targets, the Russian invaders now face significant difficulties in commanding their units, supplying resources, and preparing new attacks. As part of the SBU operation, 3 locations where personnel were stationed, including FSB Special Forces, were also hit. In addition, Ukrainian specialists struck a facility producing unmanned aerial vehicles and 2 fuel and lubricant depots. 2 UAV launch positions, an ammunition depot, and a logistics hub were also targeted. 4 command and observation posts and other military facilities were also eliminated. FP2 drones were used to strike these targets. According to the SBU press service, the UAVs were equipped with warheads weighing 105 kilograms, which ensured the high effectiveness of the operation. SBU drones are working not only directly against Russian occupiers, but also against targets that support the front. We're talking, of course, about the Russian military-industrial complex. And here, too, the Russians have suffered losses in recent days. UAVs paid a visit to the plant. Metafrax Chemicals located in Permkrai. The distance to it is 1,600 kilometers. But that's no obstacle for the SBU when the task is to undermine Russia's rear military industry. This particular enterprise is the largest producer of methanol in Russia. Its products are used to manufacture chemical components necessary for the production of explosives and other military materials. This is already a strike on the Ukhta oil refinery. Here, the SBU set a new record. This oil refinery is located 1,750 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Attacking oil facilities seems to be one of the security service's favorite drone targets in general. The previous night, the SBU also struck the Tamaneftegaz oil terminal in the Krasnodar region.
They were, after all, of the airplane type.
A drone?
A drone, right there in real time where...
Did it fall?
Yeah, just look out the window.
Tamaneftegaz is one of the largest Russian ports in the Black Sea region, handling the transshipment of oil, gas, and ammonia. The previous strike on this terminal on January 22nd caused Russia losses of around $50 million. And that's just a small part of the work accomplished in a very short time by the security service to undermine the military potential of the Russian Federation. And how much more is still ahead.
The Ukrainian boxer and current world heavyweight champion, according to the WBC, WBA and IBF versions, Oleksandr Usyk fell for a prank and became a victim of the Russian pranksters Vovan and Lexus, who are openly pro-Kremlin jokers. The pranksters themselves published the video of the prank on Usyk. Online sources report that Vovan and Lexus pretended to be the president of Poland, Karol Nawrocki. And, among other things, they asked Usyk about his political ambitions and whether he intended to run for president of Ukraine after finishing his professional boxing career. Interestingly, the entire conversation took place in English. Listen for yourself.
Maybe you see this as a chance to become president next time.
Maybe, Mr. President, maybe. But it's very difficult. If God gives me a chance, if God sends me a sign, I will go to work for the good of my country.
All right. It would be nice to have 2 boxer presidents in the EU. I think we wouldn't go to war with each other.
Usyk himself has not yet commented on this video. And what do you think? Was this whole prank really the work of artificial intelligence? If it's true, how do you assess Usyk's ambitions to run for president? Write to us. That's all for now. Please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our next episodes. See you next time.